discussion of debris removal from Turkey Creek Golf Course waterway.
Basically, we had a Thanksgiving get-together, and the senior men for me have not been working. We've kind of shut them off since we're not mowing and everything anymore. They came up to me and asked if they could come in and start working on that creek bottom. And I said, well, we're really not wanting to. We're gonna wait and talk to the new year because we're tight on funds, and you know, we don't wanna pay out those wages. But three out of the four, and then the fifth one that helps out every now and then in the clubhouse would come out and help too. But three out of the five, two of them are getting knee replacements and one's getting a hip replacement. And that's happening December 13th and December 17th. So they'll be out after that for the next 2 months. And we've looked at the creek bottom, and we think if we had 5 solid days to work on it, we could get a lot done, because there's not as much there as what has been in the past, on the meanders and stuff. I don't know if the floods this year pushed everything down, but we could get at least the low water bridges areas cleaned up, and those spots where the meanders are, where there are some debris, we could put a big dent in it in those 5 days, or in the days coming up to when those guys go in for surgery. So they asked me if that would be something we could do. So, you know, we're looking at 5 guys for 8 hours a day at $10 an hour. You know, it could be $2,000 or better to do that, and I don't know if we have the money to do that.
With the transfer, do we have money?
We have the cash. I just did send them a reminder to let me know, because budget right now is tight.
Mhm.
The revised budget that, based on our estimates through December, and the revised budget will be overspent by 20,000. With the current certified budget, we'll have a balance of around 4,000. So.
Your call.
Would it be, let me ask you this question, would it be possible, since this is exclusively dealing with the creek bed and drainage as it relates to that, is it possible that you could charge some of those out to stormwater, some of those wages out while they're working on this particular project?
I don't know, do you have the ability to do that in Casell?
I can. Do we have a wage line item built into the stormwater utility? We just need to check. If there is one, then we can, yeah.
I'm not sure if there's a line item that is in the ordinance when it was established that wages could be paid out of there.
That could be your one out if you decided you wanted to do it. And otherwise, what I think you're saying, Jeanette, is there's a chance that we might have to do a budget amendment.
Yeah, and
If-
we're coming up close.
Puts us over that.
We're real close to, we can do a budget amendment.
We can, we have the cash with the transfer.
Absolutely, and it just has
I
to
would
be.
just like to, because we had in the ordinance, we pay wages, and we plan to do some of that down there, to just take $2,000 out of wastewater.
Charge their wages directly over there for that purpose, as long as
Yeah,
they're.
you'll just have to help me on
Yeah.
doing that. And then we just keep it under $2,000, right?
Right.
Under $2,000.
Correct.
Okay.
That won't make a big dent for you, right? Okay.
No,
So
I guess,
we'll have to bring it next week.
Okay.
You do what you,
just
I was
to,
gonna say, if we have a couple days this week that they can get out here.
Yeah.
Okay.
Just to kind of clarify things, though, we can't just continue to, you know, every other month or every 3 months or whatever, to go out here and take $2,000 or $3,000 out of that account and keep using it for labor. This is gonna be a one-time deal, and we need to figure out where we're gonna go, and where we're gonna go in a long-term deal. Okay?
yeah, but it won't probably be a one-time deal.
I understand that,
But we don't know where we're going yet.
That's what I'm saying, we need to figure out where we're going before we just go out here and start spending 2,000 for this, and 2 for that, and 5 for this, and,
And I don't
So
think we're
on.
gonna do that.
okay?
Okay. Okay, I'm gonna jump down to 4.1, Central College.
discussed, a few weeks back, allowing Central to, phase the construction of locker and restroom facilities so they could go ahead and finish work necessary to get in and practice at the, new wrestling center that's going in at, West Kansas Avenue. We have the stamp drawings back that phase out the construction, and we've spoken to the fire department and, gotten their recommendations for, changes to the plans at this point. So everything that had been asked has been addressed. I just wanted to share that and see how you wanted to proceed.
Okay, I thought the last time we talked about the restroom would go in before fall.
Well, it just took some time to work through it, trying to coordinate schedules and everything. They can still achieve what they need to achieve to be in, ahead of the bulk of their season. So the bottom line there is, as the weather gets colder, some of the other teams will want to move inside to practice, and there'll be a lot of conflict for the existing space, so if they can go ahead and get into their area, it would work well for them.
Maybe I'm not, thinking straight here, but I thought we said that you would have the restrooms done by fall. So that what you're saying in this paragraph is no different.
Well, that had been the plan, just coordinating with city staff without taking over a lot of it.
Yeah, but even if it took longer to figure everything out, we're still on the same track, right?
Well, yeah.
What's
Yeah,
different?
it wouldn't, and they could still achieve their phase one and be in and
Right,
meet their second
Yeah.
phase, yeah.
are we okay? Yep. You? Okay,
Okay.
so we won't really need to do anything next Monday?
Well, I'll have to ask, I don't know if we would need it, that would be something that you voted on. I'll get you an answer and I'll,
Did we do, for example, when we did the brewer, we did an agreement of some sort that said that it would be done by a certain.
right, well, that was a moratorium on a public facility that's serving food and things like that. It has strict requirements, I mean, it was a little bit of a different, there was a full-blown site plan and all kinds of stuff that went with that.
How about the occupancy, is there, do you write a conditional occupancy, or do you put something onto that, is that how you would
Yeah.
handle this one?
Yeah, we would give a conditional CO that would sunset on the first, pending completion of the second phase, and then, once that's done, we would reissue a permanent CO.
Okay.
Have this need all of his life safety stuff in place before he can
Exactly.
proceed forward.
Alright.
Why don't you bring something next week, so at least we have it in the minutes,
Okay.
okay? Anything you wanna say?
I'm good,
Martin, Ann? If you're quiet, you look like you're wise.
Don't wanna open my mouth and prove people other.
Okay, good biblical principle. Okay. I'll, go back to, municipal court then.
Every year we order new case jackets, for the court, and we're to the point with with being full staff to the police department, we're running extremely low, so we had to order new case jackets. So,
Michael's not even here to defend.
the bill for that came in just over $1,000 from Atelier at $1,015.57, and it is budgeted every year.
You can bring it next week?
Yep.
Okay, public lands and facilities,
Okay.
still got a playground piece.
Yeah, we have, the playground, the Farmers Alliance playground at Wall Park, requesting permission to put a sign up to close it. I have all the inspections that was performed by McKeefer, and he's our certified playground safety inspector. We also attached to your board docs is the evaluation from a third-party inspection, which is Travelers Insurance, our insurance agency. And there's just too many hazards for this playground, and we're aware of it now. And I think we need to put a fence up and close it down. We have made attempts to, I have contacted Farmers Alliance to see if they want to help with purchasing another playground system for that area. We need to come up with a game plan. We have some quotes from Miracle, which is a Miracle playground system. Back in 2014, Miracle approached the city about replacing it and giving a 40% discount on the equipment. Nothing was done at that time. I guess Miracle realizes that, you know, it's already lived its life expectancy. It's, was put in 1988. So, we're looking at a 30-year structure. So what we're asking commissioners, to let us go ahead and put a sign up and put temporary fencing up before we start pulling anything and have the same issue that we had with the smaller playgrounds. And then it gives us time to, notify the public and let the public know that, it has, what, 30 head entrapments?
Minimum of 35.
Yeah.
What was the replacement cost in 14, Ms. Carter?
They're gonna honor, for just the playground, and this is just for equipment only, it's $57,000 for the equipment only. A total turnkey project with servicing, installation, equipment will be about $120,000. And the best way to do it would be the way we did the Hess Park one. If we
I
can
was
get
just gonna ask you.
If we can get the money to purchase the equipment, and then we can have them come out and do a supervised install and do a community build, just like we did at Hess Park, that would be the way to approach it.
It'll be the same size,
It'd be the same.
I mean, the same, I guess, when I say size, I mean the
Yeah.
amount of,
The footprint,
equipment that's there.
yes, the footprint that they gave us is the same, will fit in the existing structure area.
Okay. I think that, probably because of the hazards, you have the ability to put it up, but you ought to bring it next week to announce the closing, and that we're working for, a renovation of it.
Okay.
Okay.
Okay. We'll do that.
yeah, I guess the fact that,
I think we need to go on record as closing it.
Okay.
yeah, the fact that we know now that there's some safety issues and so on, we know it, so now it becomes public knowledge, and we need to close it and do what we need to do,
Okay.
okay?
All right, thank you.
All right, we should be down to Public Works. See, there's one thing at 10 o'clock.
There's a 9:30 as well.
Yeah,
that-
I know that.
Okay.
Do you want to cover whatever you can cover?
Sure. We had one of the reuse pumps at the wastewater treatment facility went out. We have 3 of them, in use. The reuse pumps supply water throughout the plant. Reuse water is used in several pieces of process equipment as well as irrigation. This particular motor had 11,368 hours on it. We received a quote from Fluid Equipment Wichita for a 10 horse, 460 volt, 3-phase motor, $1,435. It's time to renew our service contract to perform sanitary and storm sewer locates, within the city, to meet the requirements of the Kansas Underground Utility Damage Prevention Act. We received 2 quotes. The first was from Piping Technology. They quoted us $14 per call. They were unsuccessful last year. and they had given us a quote of $15. They had done it for years and years. Last year, they wanted to go up $1. They had went back to their 2018 cost of $14 per locate. First hour, $35 above initial locate, and then $30 per hour beyond that. USIC last year gave us a cost of $13 per call. That's for regular locates, and then they broke up quarter hours at $15 an hour, which of course is $60 an hour. They went up,
$1, they were 12 last year.
yeah. So, it's hard to say exactly, how this would pan out, but last year there were 2,339 locates, several hourly charges, and many complaints about things that weren't marked or mismarked with USIC. This is the first year that we had used USIC. When Piping Technologies was in place, they had never charged us any additional charges. So last year we spent $12.25 per locate at the higher prices, assuming that the hourly changes, would be the same, and we can't definitively say that. It would come out just a little bit more, or $14.04, the best we can calculate per locate. And again, they refused to locate our traffic signals and like our electrical beacon, stuff like that, because it wasn't in the contract. We've added that into the contract, so going forward, they'll have no choice, but it looks like Piping Technologies could be slightly closer or slightly cheaper, but it's gonna be pretty close, as best as we can tell.
If they're slightly cheaper by the best we can figure, I'd like to bring them back in. I think we had less problems, and they are local, and they spend a lot of money. We gain a lot of sales tax from them that we don't get otherwise too.
I agree.
Okay, the next item is on the Safe Routes to School Phase 2. This is the design with Alfred Benish and Company. This is change order number 1, which is the final change order. Safe Routes to School Phase 2 design is complete and final. The design services total $129,369.82, which was $11,206.14 under the original estimate. This change order just reduces the final amount of the design contract.
Okay.
I'll you bring these last two, both the previous item and this one next week?
Sure.
Yeah, okay.
Plaza East Place Construction Project, change order number 3 with Votes Parga. 3 parking light poles on the new parking lot light poles are on the new city right-of-way, and were not shown on the plans to be removed. These 3 light poles are in the way of the new construction, and we have no choice to remove them. The electrical for the parking lot lights, also the light, the Orscheln sign out on 56, runs through that area. So I contacted Cedar Hills Realty. They're okay with the lights being removed as long as the lights and signs are reconnected. We received a cost from Votes Parga for $7,200 to complete the work.
Bring it.
I did get a hold of Kurt Schob, and regarding the parking lot across from the community building and signing it to discourage community building parking during normal business hours. I told him the commission is willing to pay and install the signs if he would allow the public use, outside of normal business hours. He discussed it with his tenants and feels that the magic hour would be 7 o'clock, so he's willing to go along with it as long as it's signed, 8 to 7.
Is there any wiggle room?
I don't know, I can go back and,
I think we ought to go back and see if he would do 6, maybe we'll compromise at 6:30.
I would like that. I think, you know, probably 95% of the activity at the community building is gonna be, well underway by 7 o'clock, or if not, at least the parking is gonna be underway, so.
well, the other thing is, you know, by after 5 o'clock, there's gonna be more street parking available too, so, I really think 6 o'clock is reasonable.
Yeah.
And see if he'll do that.
Okay.
If he does, if you get an agreement, just bring it.
Okay.
Okay, administration,
You wanna
Patty
have
Flag.
a seat?
Sure.
Step on up, buddy, so you can get you back over there. Lee came in, and talked to staff this week, there's been some changes with Microsoft that are gonna require us to look at doing, making some changes in how we do our licensing.
So, we've always bought Microsoft Open licenses, and, they're about between $300 and $400 a shot. The, thing that they've done is, and I didn't catch it until here recently, but they actually put a term limit on it this time. They didn't used to do that. We used to buy the license, you just use it. I've had a few new computers come in that we've had to try loading software on. And they come up and they say, this activation is no longer valid, or this code is no longer valid, which activates it. So, when I've talked to the department head, and I know, police chief is, we had talked originally about going to Office 365, which is that month-to-month basis deal. And that's where I'm suggesting that we go to and we move to. Figuring it up right now with the costs that we've been quoted, it's about per license is basically $99, a little over $99 a year, about around $100. So for 2-year contract, we did it with 2-year, well, it was not a contract, but if we did it in 2 years, it'd be only $200 versus the $300 to $400 we've been paying for a 2-year contract now.
Yeah, and this, we just keep paying that monthly charge, and if we pay the 3, whatever it is, it expires in 2 years and we gotta pay it again.
Correct.
So, seems like long-term, they are trying to channel people to a monthly deal, so they keep you in the family and make it cheaper to do it that way, so you'll stay in the family.
Yeah, and really the other side of that is because we're on a month-to-month, you always have the latest, greatest updates. If they come out with a new version, you already got, then you should be able to get up to that.
And it's on a user basis.
It's on a user base instead of machine base. That's the other part of it. So we actually will have to buy more licenses to get, cause like the PD, they need it for all case uses, so every one of their officers is gonna have to have a license, so.
Okay.
It will be an additional cost for that reason.
Yeah.
But unfortunately, there's not a lot of choices we have.
Nope.
Other than not using Microsoft Office, which really isn't an option, so.
Yeah, I mean, there's one called Open Office, but it's a Linux-based
Thanks.
group, and so it's free, but the problem is it's always playing catch up to Microsoft. I mean, they have to wait for Microsoft to put stuff out, and so then they kind of get
I talked about the timing of doing this, I mean, it's probably dire that we do it for law enforcement.
with the law enforcement, since we just purchased 2 or 6, 8 computers for them, we're going to do yours a little sooner, because some of those computers are actually gonna be used by multiple users, not just one. So we gotta do it for them, probably sooner, and I know that's why we're kinda looking, trying to get that done yet this year, and then, next year, we probably need to look at start working with administration and so forth as well. Gonna finally get in there.
Right,
Given-
maybe not as quite as critical because we all
Right.
use our own computers
Yeah.
and there's not as much shared use. but-
Exactly. The only thing that I can say is if we end up getting a message from them that says, we need to reactivate this, then we have to do something. If that doesn't happen, we're good to go for a while longer. And I have had one that came up that way.
So you say you have had one that came up?
I have had
Oh,
one that
really?
came up. Yep, actually it's one of BPU's.
Good for them.
So,
Okay.
so.
Well, we don't have a whole lot of choice. We don't wanna move away from Microsoft at this point.
I mean, it's
So
the
we'll
most
just
used.
take the, first option there, $20 a month, and get everybody ultimately signed up. So, if any of you in other departments, when you came into department head meeting last week, but if there's anybody, any department where you have a couple people sharing a license, you're gonna have to move that other person over there probably sooner than later, so, and buy a license for them too.
Yep.
On a monthly
And
basis.
I gave of course, PD gave them their quote, and then I've given Public Works and then administration quotes. Several of the other departments we've already done this with, so they're already over on Office 365, so it's nothing new for them, but,
But for example, a quote for Public Works is gonna be $700 and that'll be an annual license fee. Quote for,
That's just for the office
yeah,
in here, that doesn't include street and wastewater.
street wastewater already switched, so they're already done.
would be $996 for administration. And that includes all the commissioners as well, is that correct?
So what?
That includes all the commissioners
Yes,
as well?
that includes all the commissioners. We can put it on those, and we can also put it on the computer if you guys actually get to where you actually have computer use and have it does. So, I mean, I know there's computers there, but I also know they're older, and you guys don't normally mess with yours.
I do use one.
I know you do.
I don't have the quote that you had for PD, but
PD,
It's just over 4,000,
yeah,
4,241.
40, yeah, it's another 4,000.
that'll be an annual fee that you'll be looking at paying.
Yeah.
Okay, so we should bring something on, agenda for next week to at least move on PD, and then
Yeah.
after the first of the year, we should take these quotes and approve it, so whenever it comes up, we don't have to all of a
Yeah.
sudden have to pass something for it to happen,
Agreed.
okay? Thanks, Dave.
Thanks.
Okay, now we'll do petty cash since we did the IT petty cash.
Nick came to us last week, he had an event that occurred on Saturday, which
Nick
was.
McQueen.
Yes, Nick McQueen.
And Steve, change his name, we should change his name to Steve.
Steve, okay,
Steve McQueen.
Steve McQueen.
Maybe to the
Um,
other guy.
This was his first open bar event, so he was in need of cash. So due to the urgency, we used the administration petty cash, $200 to run that event. Now we need official action to establish a $500 petty cash. We'll reimburse the $200 that we used from the proceeds, but this is what we feel would be an adequate amount, not knowing exactly how much to use, so this is just a request to establish that for his future events.
And a lot of it's gonna be used to make change and things of
Sure.
that nature, so during events.
I think that, probably you should bring it next week.
Okay.
And that we establish it.
Sounds good?
Mhm.
Anybody,
That's good.
We may look at 6:30, but
Yeah, I'll get feedback. Do you have any feedback on Saturday's event? Was that enough money to run that event?
I think
or-
so. And
Okay.
it, you know, it wasn't a big event, but
Okay.
most of the people that purchase anything from the bar area use their cards.
Did they?
Yeah.
Okay. And that's what that's what the hope is, but
Yeah.
one never knows depending on the venue.
They did what now? They use a credit card?
Yeah, they use their debit cards.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Well, that's good.
It's more and more, probably won't need big amounts of cash.
And a lot of them, like he mentioned, for weddings, they pay in advance an X number of dollars so that
No big cash.
there won't be big cash transactions, so
Right.
that's the hope, but
Okay.
we'll start with 500 and see how that goes.
Okay, all right, you can bring it next week. Okay, the only thing that I show left is David Attenberry at 10 o'clock.
9:30 you have, or 10 o'clock you've got MRCs that's gonna come in and talk about extending the sewer main.
When does David Attenberry comes at 10:30?
Yeah.
Okay, I have one thing that I want to, we've done a pre-project for plastics extrusion machinery already, and the cost benefit analysis has been done for a tax abatement with the county. The public hearing will be on December 16th at 9:30, that's 2 weeks from today in the morning, at the county commissioners meeting on the 5th floor. I have all of the forms here that have been completed and signed by Rick Whitty and Kyle Hawk, and also the cost benefit analysis by Stephen Robb. So I will give them to Nick, and anybody that wants to look at them, look at them. The way that this, remind you, the way that this works is the fact that the only way that it will be stopped is if the school district and ourselves take action, do not agree with it. Otherwise, I'm assuming that the county will approve the tax benefit. They will, as you already know, those of you that were in the pre-project meeting, will be out there at the corner of, what is that, 17th and, Northview, out there. They'll be just east of Prairie Land Partners, John Deere, and they will take part of that property. I'm assuming that it's the county that will put in the cul-de-sac just north
I think they weren't really talking about doing the cul-de-sac at this point.
right now, but anyways, it shows on their plans.
Yeah, that was part of an original set of plans, so.
Yeah, so anyway, if they decide to do it, I think sooner or later they'll take probably that whole property at the way he's been growing, but he does not want to commit to MIDC for the whole 30 acres at this time. So anyway, they will move there. Once they move there, we'll probably see something on Western Green taking over PEM property. So that's the game plan. But if you want to look at that, you can look at that. My feeling is that there's not a need for us to be there, but that is the same morning as our meeting and then Commissioner Moore's reception, so, whether or not we want to send somebody over there just to be there for the public hearing and come back, if we want to do that, then we can work that part out. But I think it would be good for us to just go and hear what's going on, so we need to send a representative to be there for that. So, but I don't see us taking any action to stop him. And if he keeps on growing, I think it'll be a good thing for the community.
I think their plan is to be on city sewer and also,
Water.
VP water and electricity,
Water.
so.
And that's all already out there, so.
Yeah, it's already out there because with Prairie Land Partners being out
Right,
there.
when we did Prairie Land Partners, we basically did all of the utilities, assuming that we could sell the other 30 acres there, and it's also set up, there's other property to the north of there. It has a somewhat of a problem on a water flow area near that tree line to the north, but there could be other properties that are able to locate just on the other side of the tree line, but maybe unless somebody else has a better idea, I think that Virgil should go to the public hearing, at least take notes.
Okay.
2 weeks from today at 9:30 at the 5th floor of the old bank building.
Did you figure out if the site plan will be done, or that subdivision will be done through us or through the county?
Falls just outside of our subdivision
Does it? Okay.
footprint. It's
So-
literally the next property over the line, so.
County will do it.
mhm.
Did we not do Prairie Land Partners?
That's before my time, I couldn't tell you offhand.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure we did all that and brought it through here. I can't imagine that that's 3 mile deal is over the,
Well, it's in our 3 mile ETJ, but the regulation spells out which sections inside there that we do and don't apply. So when I started looking at it initially, it looked like a no-brainer, we would absolutely be right. But when I started reading the regulation to figure out exactly, turns out that's in section 14, and our subdivision jurisdiction cuts that section in half, and it's just over the line. So it could be that the other one would have been on the other side of that line.
yeah, we might want to double check with the county to be sure they're handling it.
Yeah, I followed up with John Versu and Casey. John said that he would put it on the agenda.
Okay. Okay, but I don't see anything for us to do,
Okay.
but just being there so we know everything that comes up.
Okay.
Okay. When is,
I can see whether Glenn got here any bit earlier, otherwise we might take a short break
okay,
till 10.
we'll take a 15-minute break and come back at 5 till.
Want me to
Purple
start?
Girl.
That's right.
So, tell me, what we want to do about extending, is it Grimes? Up between, Eisenhower School, New Hope Church, on to Udy Grant baseball fields in the parking lot there, I'm assuming.
Yeah, well, the one thing, I mean, the cost, my concern is the cost for us to do that.
So essentially, you wanna talk a little bit about what's brought all this up and
They're gonna say, let's start at the bottom and go up, or from the top and go
Alright,
down, one or
so
the other.
what has brought this, we knew, we need to put a bathroom out by those T-ball fields. And we knew we were gonna have to do this. And we knew it was going to be expensive. We just didn't at the time, because of cost. But we thought, well, we would, save up some money and then do it in a few years. But we were doing porta potties, but then, John, you wanna explain why we can't do porta potties anymore, why the companies won't allow that?
They have no access, cause we're all interior, we're just sidewalks, and if they don't have access, they won't service their porta potties. And little access road we do have, the waterway runs through there, so there's a huge dip that I doubt they could get their truck through that anyway. That's if they put porta potties out on our access road, which is still not where we want bathrooms.
Right.
Interior wise, they can't access porta potties to service them, so they won't do it.
Because of the sidewalks that's there, they don't wanna back over the sidewalk or what?
They
They're
can't
too
get in
heavy.
there.
From coming into the Grant Sports Complex from Main Street, there's a lot of sidewalks and fields to get clear back to where we want porta potties.
They're on the far eastern edge.
Yeah, the
Right.
far eastern edge. That's a lot of
Yeah.
sidewalks and traffic, pedestrian traffic.
Well, I don't think that the platted development behind New Hope Church is, gonna happen quickly. But when we had talked before, if you take Sonora and you go up, the sewer there is deep, this one is shallow.
Yeah, this one's shallow.
The other one down there at Sonora is deep. And I don't know if there's any way to work with Mark Houghton to come up and then across on some type of easement where we have, I think it's, if I remember right, it's about 30 feet deep off of Sonora to come to where you need to tie in then versus coming,
I think the deep sewer's on Maxwell.
Clear out on Maxwell.
I thought there was something coming up there from the sewer we have there at the thing. Anyway, we can check on it, but,
You remember?
I wanna say about 17 feet deep, about half that.
17 feet at,
It's Sonora.
That's at Sonora
and Northview, I don't know how deep.
so I don't know if we have enough room there or not to do this, but if we have to put a lift station in, it's
Yeah.
cost prohibitive. So my only thing is, you know, we can easily put a driveway in there. I don't know if we put that straight shot in there, are you still gonna have to have porta potties?
Well, they still won't be able to put them inside Grant. They would go on the outside of the fence, which we have 3, 4, and 5-year-olds that play on those fields. So it's not safe for those little ones. I mean, a parent would have to go with them.
Yeah.
And the concern now is that those little ones, when they have to go, they have to go. And they can't make it to the bathrooms that are inside the complex to the west. It's too far. And so I have parents that are requesting bathrooms out there. So, yeah.
Do you know what the estimate would be to run sewer line up, public sewer all the way up there, all the way up there? I know I talked to you a little bit about that, Jeff.
$173,000 is the estimate Justin put together, and that's Wickersham up to between the two ball fields, and that's about all farther we can go. So if this area is ever developed, it would require a lift station to get in there or take it to the east, so.
Yeah.
So the only real benefiting property would be the,
Well, if this ever develops, it'd be half of that plus the.
But I think if that land ever develops, we really need to either come off of Sonora up to there.
Probably.
I don't think we can, if we run this up, it's gonna be exclusively for MRC.
And you said it would require a lift station?
To go in, to bring it down to Wickersham, to go any further north up here,
Oh.
it would require a lift to get into it there.
Okay, tell me, which dot, is it the dot right there? How far up do you see the green dot right between the two ball fields?
That's where,
the
yeah.
second dot north?
And this is with no survey, this is just LiDAR and,
Yeah, I know, but that $173,000 would be just to that, and it would only serve Unity Grant. And we
Correct.
wouldn't need a lift station.
correct,
Does that include the pavement removal and replacement on the Wickersham?
yeah.
That seems low to me, just. We were spitballing some numbers on that, came up with more like 250,000 for the sanitary sewer construction, but I don't know what numbers you guys have been getting lately, so. You're in that range.
And that's coming from the southwest corner of Wickersham
Correct,
and Grimes and coming up to the third manhole, I guess that's
Yeah.
what we're talking about.
yes. I did survey it, and it will work, it's just very minimal cover where that swale crosses it. We'd have 3 inches of dirt over top of the sewer pipe. So.
But we would have to have a lift station.
You would not have to have a lift pump. That gravity would work, but like I said, we're looking at the $180,000 to $250,000 cost to put that sewer in. And I would recommend putting it on Grant's property so that you can get the sewer west of any, future box culvert or anything that would be put in at that swale crossing. Now, Gwen may get mad at me for bringing this up, but you guys touched on it earlier. Access is an issue. I'm worried they're gonna put all this in and the fire department's gonna say you can't do that because we don't have emergency access.
Well, we already brought that up
Okay.
at our MRC meeting. So,
Now, throw another, has
TJ around?
the site plan for the Grant Sports Complex ever been updated to reflect all this?
No, we
Because
had talked.
Jeff, correct me if I'm wrong, but they can't issue a building permit or a zoning permit for the building permit unless that's been updated in their site plan, correct? I'm just asking the question because that's been an issue on other construction projects.
Yeah,
so-
and that would be the normal process.
Yeah.
So you have to update your site plan, we'd have to keep this to the west, so it stays on Grant right away. And then, depending on what you're gonna do, what kind of driveway are you expecting to bring up to there, or are you not expecting to bring a driveway? I thought there was gonna be, a parking lot on that side for these little kids' parents initially.
We're set up on our property for parallel parking, even after a future Grimes comes through. So our access road is, right now, is essentially on our property on what would in the future be parallel, or is now parallel parking, and would be still if Grimes came through
Off of Sonora,
off of, North Grimes. Just
or
keep-
Grimes, I mean,
keep heading
yeah,
north.
Grimes, not
Keep
Off
Sonora.
heading
of-
north
off of
on
Wick-
Grimes.
Okay, Wickersham
Right.
North.
Our
Yes.
little access road is just to the left of what would be a future North Grimes.
Yeah.
So we left room for, we're parallel parking right there.
What about the part that still belongs to the school district on that first section? Are you able to cheat over on that a little bit?
We're on the easement at the moment, our access road.
I talked to them about that when we,
On their part, we're on the easement. On our part, we're on our property.
Okay.
so we do.
So the easement narrows up once it goes beyond there.
I don't know how that's all.
No, I don't think so.
I don't know how it would narrow up then.
Well, I guess if a 175 to 200 and 250 or 200 or whatever it is a showstopper, then we're kind of sitting here mumbling to ourselves, aren't we?
Well, what we've done in the past is we bonded this, and then, what is it, a 20-year?
Yeah, we could put
And they
special assessments on
They
it.
put special assessments, and they pay the special assessments for that particular bond every year until it's paid.
Right.
and so they don't have to come up
What
with.
I'm saying is,
200,
until we get that
quarter.
resolved,
Right.
we're sitting here talking.
So, we can easily, do arrangement like we've done in the past, but I guess the big question is, can you afford the bond payment?
Sounds like we'd even need a bridge. And that would be on our side, and then it'd be in the way in the future.
Does it
So-
let me ask you this, does it matter what kind of building it is, if it's
Yeah.
a block building? Is from
Yeah.
a water standpoint or an access
It's still
standpoint?
gonna require one, but you're pretty close, depending on where you put that. So without a site plan, like if you put it in between the T-ball fields,
Yeah.
you're gonna make it. If you're on the north side of the T-ball fields, you're probably gonna have to extend a water line, but without a site plan, without looking at integrity to see where the water lines actually are, you have one really close. I don't know what's going out to these other buildings.
Do you have any water coming across between or to the south of those two small fields? Anything there?
Irrigation lines,
That's it.
it's all
That's it.
irrigated back there. But we've got,
Where are you tying in to the water line for the irrigation? Where does that,
it comes
That's all fed
from
from
Main
the-
Street.
Main Street, there's a pit on the southwest corner of the property, and it all feeds up from there, private lines, and it branches out all over the place.
so it's coming from a long way?
A long
Yeah,
way.
long ways.
So it's on, but it's not on Wickersham,
No,
Not ours.
it's on MRC's property?
it's MRC's property,
Okay.
just off of Main Street, clear on the west side.
Where would you require a hydrant for this?
That's, yeah, within 500 feet.
And you think, where do you think there's a hydrant currently already?
There is currently a hydrant right behind Eisenhower Elementary to the north of it. That is how you built those other buildings. So it's within the distance of that. This other one, the other one that you have over at Grimes and Wickersham, depending on where that line is, you might get away with just adding a hydrant over here. But depending on where you put that too, from that other hydrant behind Eisenhower, you might not need one. So I really need a site plan to see where you're at.
Okay.
Look at that in comparison to the water lines that are existing.
I think if you can put together, you contract to do the site plan, either Rich or somebody else, and we size the project for the worst number instead of the best one right now,
Yeah.
and figure out with, Stephen Nicholas, a rough estimate of 20 years on what that would be, and get back with you. That's an estimate, because we're probably not gonna do this until August. But then you won't have a payment till next year.
Let me ask you this, Rich, is there any benefit in running, and maybe not going as far north with the public line and running, or can it even be done to run a private lateral further to the?
Private
south?
lateral can't be run at a grade flat enough.
You can't, okay.
I mean, we could put in a private sanitary sewer main.
But that's probably not any cheaper
Still
than doing
same
it this
cost.
way.
Yeah, still gotta do the same
But if we
infrastructure,
figure the worst cost, what's your worst cost scenario right now?
250,000 just for the sewer.
Say 250,000, we try to size the bond payment for you. I think if we do the bond in August, you don't make your first payment until the next year, if I remember right.
2021.
And so you won't have a payment till 2021, so you can start to pay off all the initial stuff here and get yourself in position to be making that bond payment every year for 20 years. If you think you can do more, we can make it 10 or 15, but, we can do that. If you end up with some money somewhere, we can always call the bond, after the initial period that allows us to call.
Okay.
And you could pay it off if you didn't want to have that for 20 years. In the meantime, once you have your site plan, we can do all of the fire department stuff. The site plan would give us all of the detail that we need for sewer, for electricity, for everything else. And right now, instead of coming all the way from that southwest corner, we would be coming up the short distance of about 1,200 feet to that last manhole that shows between the two ball fields and not have a lift station. And all of that is probably for about as cheap as you're gonna be able to do it. If you want to do anything different, we're talking about a lot more money.
If
So
there's-
if you wanna do that, then what really is needed is we can get a rough estimate on a bond payment for you.
Okay.
But, once you have that, you have to decide, do you wanna do the site plan and go forward? And I think if we're using 250 as the high scenario, if we come in under that, then it'll be less. I don't wanna use the 173, 178, whatever it was, and then find out it was 250. Now we're talking about a 40% increase, which may make a difference in how you do, or whether you do the project or not.
Right, okay.
But that would be, for me, unofficially, the action that we can do. We can try to size the bond payment for you as what it is today, but it will be whatever it is when we let the bond.
Right,
But,
yeah, and that's fine.
if we do that, then we can maybe include it, that we have another one coming up in August.
That's what we're projecting
Huh?
now. That's
Yeah,
what we're projecting.
We have one
now.
coming up, so if we can include it as part of that, then we're saving on the whole cost of establishing the bond to begin with. If we have to do you separately, we have to pay all that separate cost. So we would try to work you into what we're already gonna do in August, and
You'd be a
and we
small
will,
part of the
it will
cost,
just
yeah.
be, a work for, Janetta and Finance to break out your part and tell you what you owe
Sure,
each
okay,
time.
appreciate that.
Yeah, so that
Good?
to me is the scenario that we could do.
My only question would be is, can you make regular special assessment payments? Can MRC, since it's a quasi, do you know if there's any issue with you guys making?
Well, they don't actually own the properties, right, it's city
Right,
property.
city property.
So,
Can we
is there
assess
an
our-
agreement?
What would be an agreement in lieu of
Yeah.
charging ourselves that
Yeah.
amount of money, so,
Yeah.
so we'd have to work out some sort of
Right.
Well, we
agreement
did,
like what we did.
when we bought the land, we,
And you did, when you developed the T-ball fields and everything,
Developed, yeah.
we took out geo bonds for that.
correct,
And did that, we probably have to just do something similar. And I'd say you probably need to, once you guys have a more solid idea of what those costs are gonna be, and if you're gonna have to add water lines, that's a big decision the MRC board's gotta make, whether they wanna spend that kind of money in. Because the building itself is gonna be further costly too, won't it?
yeah, and I talked with Chad, and we knew it was, I mean, but,
What's the building itself gonna
I
cost?
think Tyler threw out a number about 150,000.
yeah, they
Does that
went up
sound
to
right?
200,
That's without any of
Yeah.
without any of the sewer lines or anything.
yeah,
Correct, that's assuming that the building wasn't gonna be heated as well.
right. Yeah, cause
And
we
you don't
didn't,
need that, you don't need it heated?
we don't unless we were going to have to do a lift station. And if that were the case,
Then you
then
have to
it
heat it.
would, because then we'd have to keep water on that,
Yeah,
so,
So that'll be a big decision whether you're gonna spend $300,000 or
Yeah.
$400,000 on a bathroom. I mean, that's what you're really talking about over
Yes.
the length of that project, and, you know, it's just a matter of where the priorities of MRC are. I mean,
yeah,
Is there a feeling on future development there to the east?
it's not gonna happen. It took a hard sell to get south of Wickersham and west of Sonora, 32 lots, and the lots are not selling like hotcakes. So he will not make a move north of New Hope
Andrew Shout,
until he has almost all those others sold.
Yeah, you'd probably go north of,
Sonora.
Sonora first, yeah.
Yeah.
Sonora's all the
and
way through now.
your other challenge is you're only gonna be able to serve half that development with the sewer line, probably because of how, I mean, unless they're gonna spend the money on a lift, which would be exorbitant. I mean, or you have a very limited amount that would actually be able to benefit from.
Any place in the 10 years I've been there that we needed a lift station, we have never developed.
Yeah.
It's just too expensive. The last one we priced was between $1.25 million and $1.5 million. And even if we went farther west of the property and platted that, we still couldn't drive the lot cost to a reasonable price. When you add another, you know, take the worst case scenario, you add $1.5 million in to 80 lots, that's a lot of money. Yeah, so, but I think, what we can do is, I'm assuming that you can pay for the buildings some way on your own. So what we would do is we would price the 250,000 and we'll give you an idea on what a 20-year bond payment would be. And probably give you a range of what it is today, what happens if it goes up 1%, and then you can make a decision how much more you wanna do. Is that fair?
Sounds fair.
Does the site plan tell us whether or not we've gotta have a bridge to go across that ditch?
Everybody will get a chance to put their opinion in on it, fire department,
I
police
bet
department.
those
all
aren't
that.
cheap either.
And then, once the site plan's approved, there's no more surprises at that point, and that's why I brought it up, is just to make sure you have anything that's unknown gets, now if we are gonna estimate some numbers for this, bond issue before you decide to do the site plan, you probably wanna throw $100,000 in there for the water line extension and fire hydrant, cause it sounds like we're gonna need it. Is that what I heard?
Depends on where it's at.
Well, all the locations we've discussed are 1,200 feet from the hydrant that we were talking about on Grimes and Wickersham.
If there's a water line that runs behind the school, you might be able to just get a hydrant on the line and keep it in distance.
The fire hydrant that you mentioned by the school is at the dead end of the line.
What's feeding to the north on that? Those other buildings?
There is nothing, it's all private, it feeds from Main Street, it feeds those buildings.
So I have to look at integrity and see what's on it.
So, more than likely, you're probably gonna need a fire hydrant, and so if you're gonna look at a bond issue, you're gonna wanna include that cost in the bond.
Yeah.
I'm just throwing $100,000 out there as a wild number, cause I don't know what BP would charge for running the water line, putting a hydrant in, but that would have to be done by BPU, so.
So you're looking at maybe 500,000. I mean, at what point do we decide, is that,
Yeah.
Yeah, you guys would have to make a decision on what it's worth to you.
Yeah.
If you're wanting to truly sell this, then you're talking about 20 years of youth sports, young youth sports, not two t-ball fields. If that helps.
Okay,
Okay, all right?
all right.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Hey,
I don't. I mean, we can look at that issue with the water lines.
Make us a lot less.
When you were down here.
There's all kinds, they've got light lines.
Terry's gotta get out of here at 11, so we can.
I agree. All right, take
Either
care.
one of these. Yeah.
Yeah,
the
the building is gonna be over here.
Gary, you wanna come up to the table?
So why wouldn't you just come to Crime Street? Seems-
Okay, guys,
I wanna introduce you, I think,
Meeting here.
the mayor. I don't know if you met.
Yeah, we
Larry.
met before, we've talked a couple of times.
Larry's
Still got access to it.
Larry's a commissioner.
City commissioner.
Yeah.
And Gary is the soon-to-be commissioner of
Hey, guys.
public facilities, so. And
In or
the
out?
current commissioner of public facilities is not here, so.
Okay.
He's out today, so.
I'll ask you right up front on the people that just left on, our Person Recreation Commission, if we establish a 20-year bond in August, would it just give us a range on pricing?
Interest rate?
Yeah, and what you think, a 250 or 500,000?
Let's see, for an interest rate on a 20-year borrowing, right now, I would probably say somewhere between 2.25% and 3% would be the interest rate.
Okay,
And then an estimate on what, how much the payment would be?
yeah, and then look at two amounts, we'll look at both the 2.25 and the 3 to give us a range, and then we'll look at 250 and 500,
Okay,
depending on what they find out they need to do on the site plan.
sure, let me, hold on, get my computer, my calculator out here. Okay.
Upside down, number would be even better.
Okay, let's, if it's 2 3/4. And then 20 years. And let's say a $250,000 farm.
And it would be part of something we would do in August.
Okay, yeah, it would.
Yeah,
that's-
so we're not gonna get that, all that extra charges.
Yeah, on something that small.
Right,
The payment on, at 2 3/4% for 20 years and $250,000 would be, 16,400 approximately.
okay,
And at 3%, yeah, it would be about 16,800, so.
yeah, so
Okay, so then, I guess $500,000, you just
twice that,
twice that, yeah. So about 34,000.
yeah.
So.
Okay. You can tell her
Yeah.
approximately what those two amounts would be for those two interest rates, either 2 3/4 or 3.
Okay.
Yeah, and that's our best guess right now. I'm keeping some best guess, right?
Yeah,
The world doesn't fall apart anytime.
yeah, and I don't know, those rates are, yeah, that's hard to predict where they'll be, obviously. Okay.
Okay, you've all met David, we wanted to bring David in to talk to you about a number of different things. First of all, this will be an introduction for Gary to talking about, financing and, public financing, and, wanted to talk about a number of different issues. One of the things we've been talking to David about, and maybe first things first, maybe introduce yourself.
Sure.
And kind of talk about your background. The mayor had mentioned that George K. Baum, who we had a relationship in the past with, had switched over, had been purchased by Stiefel.
Yeah.
And the financial advisor that we worked with most frequently was Roger Edgar, and Roger Edgar has retired. And so, but David's been with the firm for a number of years, and maybe just talk a little bit about
Sure.
yourself.
Yeah.
Have an introduction there.
Yeah.
Sure,
And I just might say that, even with Roger, the financial firm that we used the most to place some bonds was Stiefel Nicholas. So I don't know how that impacts underwriter versus financial advisor too. Because now you both wear the same hat, but like in accounting firms, sometimes one person can be doing something independent of another person.
Yeah, and in the municipal bond business, there is a clear separation of those responsibilities. So an advisor cannot also serve as an underwriter on the same issue.
But like Gina, that's now in St. Louis, we used to have a gal in Wichita, but then they changed their hierarchy too. So we could still have Stiefel Nicholas on an underwriting and you in Kansas City.
When previously, yes, that was the case. Previously, when Roger and I worked for George K. Baum and Company, you could have George K. Baum and Company in Kansas City as your advisor, and then Stiefel Nicholas in St. Louis could then serve as the underwriter on the bonds. And that was perfectly fine. Two separate companies, two different roles. But just recently, what happened, to give you guys a little bit of background, I've worked with George K. Baum and Company since 1987, and Roger Edgar and I worked together as partners really since the early 90s at George K. Baum and Company, and we worked on a lot of the same issues together, and we were partners for that time. George K. Baum and Company had been around since 1928. It was a family-owned company, and about 3 months ago, George K. Baum and Company announced that they were being acquired by Stiefel Nicholas. So after 3 generations of family ownership, the companies decided that they were best, or the family decided that they were best to go ahead and sell the company to Stiefel Nicholas. It's completely coincidental that you've worked with, the city's worked with Stiefel Nicholas and George K. Baum and Company in the past. Now going forward, you know, what I would anticipate that our role would be, that, you know, as a Stiefel employee, would still be to represent the city as your advisor, as a fiduciary working on your behalf. To the extent that you need to find underwriters for your bonds in the future, Stiefel Nicholas could not have that role.
Okay, that's what I was asking.
Yeah.
Because we have to either find somebody else or.
Yeah, I mean, you could choose to use us as the underwriter for your bonds, or you could choose to use us as the advisor. And I guess I've anticipated, and I think Roger did too, that it would be as an advisor.
Correct.
In that capacity. And to the extent that we need to find an underwriter, then we could, you know, we've gone through the competitive selection process to find underwriters in the past on other city bond issues, and I would expect that we would.
When you need to go to a public bond sale, it might not matter as much because they serve as the underwriter on the public bond sale, is that right, or?
If we do a competitive bid for bonds, if we do a competitive bid for bonds, then, you know, what we'll do is, as your advisor, we would just put the sale together and structure everything, and then go out and take bids, and whatever firm offered the lowest interest rate, they would be selected to be, you know, the purchaser, the underwriter of the bonds. The municipal bond industry rules, though, are pretty clear in saying whoever your advisor is cannot also purchase the bonds, even if it's a competitive sale.
Sure.
So Stiefel could not bid on the bonds as a
Right.
competitive
I think
sale.
we're pretty well aware of that.
Okay.
But we either have to have a competitive piece that you put the bid together on, so that everybody else will get a shot at it but you, or we would have to have somebody else that we felt comfortable with that would do that.
Do the underwriting.
Yeah.
And we could, if you wanted to, there's 2 ways you can select your underwriter. You can do the competitive bid process, like you're talking about, and we talked about, or we could do a request for proposal, and we would still be your advisor, but we would go out and get qualifications and fees from different firms, and you could select them sort of through an RFP process, as opposed to a bid process where you just award it based on the lowest interest rate.
Yeah.
So, sorry, I didn't mean to get off track here.
No,
but it's-
I caused the off track, but I just wanted everybody to know that the ballgame changed a little bit.
Yeah,
Not just because of George K. Baum selling, but the rules are, we have to change some things too.
yeah,
Okay,
there's been, you're right, it's because, George K. Baum sold to Steeples, caused the change, but then also the municipal bond industry rules changed a few years ago to prevent an
Right.
advisor from also serving as an
Right.
underwriter on the same issue.
right. So we had that, no problem. Now we have to take a look at what we do. I think the last bond issue that we put out was a competitive bid anyhow, so it's, we've done both ways, so
Yep.
we're familiar. Okay,
Okay.
now I won't ask any more questions for a minute.
Well, thanks. I thought maybe what I could do here is, if it's okay with you, Nick, just talk a little bit about what the city sort of has in store next year with regards to its debt issuance. And talk a little bit about some outstanding temporary notes that you have that we're gonna need to take care of. And then also talk about possibly some refinancing opportunities. So as I'm going through any of this, if you got any questions at all, just feel free to chime in. I've just got some numbers here and some information. First of all, if you just want to take one maybe of each of these and pass it around. And I apologize, I was mentioning to Jeanette earlier, I drove from Georgia yesterday and through the Smoky Mountains, and so I've been in the car for a while. My ears haven't quite popped yet, so I'm still having a little bit of a disassociation here, so I'm struggling with my hearing, I apologize. What I wanted to start with, first of all, is the page that has got the yellow markings on it. What this shows is the outstanding general obligation bonds, temporary notes, and loans that the city currently has. And in particular, what I wanted to point out is of your outstanding temporary notes that are shown in the middle of this page, you'll notice that the first one that is listed, the Series A 2019, has a final maturity date of February 1, 2020. So this is a note that is outstanding right now that comes due basically in a couple of months. This note is, and I can't recall the project that this is outstanding for.
Eagles Wing.
Eagles Landing? Okay.
Eagles Wings.
Okay. This note, we're gonna need to find permanent financing for this note. So this is gonna have to be taken out with a long-term bond issue. Now, if we were to do a bond issue for just this project, it would be a pretty small bond issue. You know, there's only about $670,000 outstanding. So to do a single bond issue for just this project, the issuance cost would get pretty expensive because there's just a fixed amount of issuance cost a lot of times that you have, and when you have a small bond issue, sometimes those fixed costs can end up contributing considerably to your overall borrowing cost. So a lot of times it makes sense to, if possible, to combine a smaller bond issue with other borrowings to do a bigger transaction. And our thought here was this. You have several other outstanding debt obligations that are callable either now or callable in 2020. For instance, if you look up at the top of your list, up at the top of this page, you'll see under the outstanding general obligation bonds, the first two bonds that are on there, the Series 135 and Series 136, are either callable now or will be callable this year. And they carry interest rates on them of, one is at 3.1%, and one has rates of up to 4.25%. Those rates are considerably higher than what interest rates are right now. So one thing that we could possibly do is combine the bonding of this temporary note that comes due with the refinancing of some of this old debt. Likewise, your KDHE loan, you've got one of your loans here that is, let's see, actually, the 2009 loan that you've got outstanding has a rate of 2.75% on it. That is again quite a bit above what the going market rate is. So our thought here is, rather than simply doing a single bond issue for the temporary note, why don't we look at doing a combined borrowing that would include bonds to pay off the temporary notes, but also bonds possibly to refinance those two bond issues that are shown, as well as refinance that 2009 KDHE loan. Now, the only trick to doing this, I shouldn't say trick, the only restriction that we've got to do this is that we can't actually refinance the Series 136 bonds until the call date, until not more than 90 days before the call date of those bonds. And you'll see the call date is August 1 of 2020. So in order to refinance that bond issue, we would actually have to close the new bond issue no sooner than May 1 of 2020. So since that temporary note comes due February 1 of 2020, but we couldn't repay the Series 136 bonds until no sooner than May 1 of 2020, what our thought here would be is that we would take the outstanding temporary notes that come due February 1, and I think Janetta might have already spoken to the bank.
Yes, I have.
In the bank, it sounds like they're willing to renew the notes for a few months. So we would renew that note for a few months, and then plan to do an issue sometime in the maybe late spring or early summer this year that would pay off the notes as well as possibly refinance those three outstanding issues. Hopefully that would then achieve a combination of things that would allow us to reduce the cost of the borrowing for the temporary notes, because we could do the long-term borrowing for that project in combination with, refinancing these old bonds. And hopefully it would also allow us, in addition to reducing the issuance cost, it would allow us to have a bigger, more attractive issue for investors that would get a lower interest rate than you might get if you're just selling smaller issue.
Yeah, you said 3 items, and I'm taking it that you're not gonna include 135, just 136A in the notes.
Oh, I apologize. I was talking about, what I was assuming is we'd refinance 135, 136,
And
the 209, as well as the notes. So
is it, would you do the 2009 KDHE loan?
that's a good question. If you look there, the final maturity date on those is September 20.
No, that's for the small one, but I'm talking about the one that still has a $6 million balance.
Oh yeah, that would be the third piece. There would be actually 4 pieces.
4 piece, that's what,
Yeah,
okay, I'm all right.
yeah, the notes plus the 2 bond issues and the 2009 loan.
Okay.
So that's conceivably what this new issue could look like. If we were to combine the notes, if we were to do 2 things, we were to extend the maturity of these existing notes for a few months, And then later in the year, do a bigger issue to refinance the 3 old debt obligations plus the new notes, plus the notes.
Okay,
Um,
and I'm assuming that you've looked at, our debt policy and what we have to gain to refinance, which should be a no-brainer, I hope.
Yeah, you know, that's a good point. In this other page is, let's look at that real closely here. Now, this is a summary of how much you could expect to save if you were to refinance each of these 3 different old debt obligations. So if you look at this, the Series 135 bonds, if we were to do the refinancing, we would refinance about $225,000 of the old debt. That carries the rate of 3.1% on it. I would anticipate that the rate on the new bonds would be about 1.96% on the new debt to refinance these. That would generate about $13,400, $13,395 of savings. The present value of those savings would equal about 4.93% of the amount of bonds that you would pay off. I think your debt policy calls for present value savings of 2 to 3%, is that?
I think it says,
It says right, study staff and the financial advisor shall monitor the municipal bond market for opportunities to obtain interest savings by refunding outstanding long-term debt. As a general rule, the present value savings of a particular refunding should exceed 3% of the refunded maturities.
Okay. So in this case, the Series 135 bonds exceed that policy by quite a bit. The Series 135 bonds, based on current interest rates, that present value savings is about 2.998%, so right about your threshold.
Sure.
The KDHE loan, those present value savings, it's about 2.46% based on current interest rates. That is a little bit below what your threshold is. So the question would be is, you know, all of these debt obligations that are shown here are currently callable. You would be able to, at the time you did the transaction, you'd be able to pay them off immediately. Do you want to have strictly adhere to your debt policy and require that you get that 3% present value savings, or would you be willing to vary from it a little bit if the savings were slightly below the 3% threshold?
Okay, a couple things. One is we're keeping the same maturity dates, that's been our policy.
Right.
Okay,
Yeah.
so I see them over there that match up with the other sheet. The Series 136, it's right at the threshold, so I don't see any problem with that. We would have to make a decision here on the KDHE loans as to we're basically a 0.5% under there, but we're still saving $138,000, so, I'm not for changing the policy, but I would be for the commission to make an exception. You see what I'm saying?
Sure. Yeah.
I want to keep our feet to the fire as best we can, but where we're ultimately saving $300,000 if we do all 3, it makes sense that we do that. Would be my feeling, even though we're 0.5% off, and we would do that.
Yeah, and as we talked about on a phone conversation a couple of weeks ago, you know, a lot of those present value targets that have been established in debt policies, like your 3% target, which is a very common number that you see, a lot of those,
Blame Roger on that.
well, no, that's pretty consistent. I've seen anywhere from, 2 to 5%, but a lot of those policies were, established at a time that, municipalities could refinance bond issues in advance of the call date of the bond issues. Those were done as what they call advance refundings, and I know the city's done those. And when you did advance refundings, a lot of, the way the tax code worked was that you would have the opportunity to refinance that bond issue one time before the call date on the old bonds. And the way the math worked is that the closer that you got to that call date, if interest rates stay the same, the more savings that you would achieve. And so you kind of had to have this bird in the hand versus two in the bush discussion when you were refunding before the call date. So a lot of times those minimum thresholds were set to provide a significant level of savings in order to determine whether or not it was worth using your one advance refinancing opportunity. The IRS a few years ago did away with the ability to refinance before the call date. So now anytime that you do a refinancing, you have to do it if you're gonna do a tax exempt refinancing, you have to do it at the call date for the bonds. Which means that what you're sort of making the assumption of when you do the refinancing is that if you decide not to do the refinancing at the call date, what you're making the assumption is that you believe rates are gonna go down in the future, and that would allow you to create more savings than you can get right now. So that's just something to keep in mind, and maybe part of the discussion this coming summer about
Yeah.
refinancing.
Just a little bit of background, we have tried to stay active because we don't believe the interest rates are going to go down, although they have stayed flat longer than we anticipated. But sooner or later, what went down will probably come back up, right? So, the reason we keep on doing things and not changing the maturity date is how can we lower our payments? Well, things are still low. If we get stuck, if things go up, we pretty well financed ourselves over an extended period of time with a low interest rate. So that's been our philosophy in what we can pay as you go. We're gonna pay as you go for some things to be able to do that. And we do have the fire truck lease coming up, which will fall off this year. And so I think it makes sense to do this. My question is, when do we pull the trigger on something like this? Do we do it on our normal time when we receive our ad valorem tax, and we sort of done that in August, because then we're gonna have the money from the ad valorem tax, and that would mean that we probably have to get I think People's Bank to agree to 6 months extension in there to do that piece of that. And that would also, if we were doing in August, give us the time to work with the First and Recreation Commission on whether they want to do this project or not.
That would make sense. And the other thing we wanna also make sure we keep in mind too is there's the concept of having your bond issue to be bank qualified.
Right.
Which is a special tax code designation that any municipality that is selling less than $10 million of new debt in any year is eligible to receive. And if you have that designation, it allows you to get a little bit lower interest rate on your bonds as opposed to if you're issuing more than $10 million. So if you just add up all of the bonds that are would be refinanced here, you're at $9,286,000.
And if we add the MRC in there, we're still slightly under 10 million.
Under 10 million.
If we take the 500,000, so we're still okay in the bank qualified.
Yeah, and but then we do have the temporary notes that are at 670. Now, some of the old debt would not count against the $10 million limit. It's a kind of a complicated calculation that we would have to bring legal counsel in to help us wade through to make sure that we didn't do anything to cause you to go over the $10 million limit, and lose the bank qualified status.
Okay.
You wanna talk a little bit about, so would you actually issue them in August, or you mentioned something about May, do we just have to?
If we were gonna do the refinancing as we talked about, we could not close on the new bond issue, before May 1. Because it has to be
Not
at least,
before.
yeah, it has to be no more, you have to close on the new bond issue no more than 90 days before you pay off the old ones. So that would mean the soonest we would wanna close would be May, we could close it
So
May 1.
to keep on that August schedule is not a problem then?
No, that's not a problem, no.
We did talk a little bit when we had our conversation on the phone about KDHE loans and that it's not uncommon that a lot of cities have refinanced those even at the lower, even though the interest, the savings might not be as great as it would be on refunding some of these older bonds.
Yeah, no, the KDHE has had, literally hundreds of millions of dollars of its old loans, refinanced by cities. And in a lot of cases, it's, might only be taking an interest rate of 2.5% to 3% down to, maybe 2% or something, but it's happened to, the vast majority of their loans that were done within the last 15 years have been refinanced.
So it's not uncommon to do that?
No, not at all, no, and they don't hold it against you if you do the refinancing.
There's no penalty or anything?
No, because I think they realize that you're doing it in the best interest of your taxpayers is why you're refinancing it. It's not because you don't like their program, it's because you can save some money for taxpayers by doing that.
And it wouldn't necessarily count towards our debt limit as well, is that correct?
Right.
Not our official debt limit?
Yeah, any bonds that the city issues for utility projects, or bonds that you issue to repay a utility project, like repay the KDHE loan that was for a utility project, GO bonds that are issued for utility projects do not count against your state statutory debt limit. Yeah.
Okay, so this 9.286 would see a reduction down on that premise?
No, none of that.
None of the KDHE loans are gonna be for utility?
Yeah, it wouldn't, it's not as though you would be adding, $5.76 million to your state debt, to your, state debt capacity, or towards your state debt
But
capacity.
it still would count for the bank qualified?
Right, exactly, yeah, cause,
Okay, but the reason I ask that is then, does that, doesn't have anything in there on the 670 on the temporary note. And if we put that in, we would not be able to include the MRC.
and that's what we need to, talk to bond counsel a little bit about, is, are there any, are we gonna be over, $10 million? If we included some for the MRC and we included the 670, if that puts us over the 10 million, first of all, does that in fact put us over the 10 million? Cause is there any of these other projects that might not count against your debt limit? I'm sorry, is there any other projects that might not count against the bank qualified limit? if it does put you over the 10 million, then what we need to do is figure out what does that in fact mean. It's not that you can't go over $10 million, it's that if you do,
Different interest rate.
a little different interest rate, yeah.
Yeah.
So if we do go over 10 million, what we wanna do is figure out what does that mean?
But then, you know, in past discussions we had with Roger and with Gilmore and Bell, past financings don't always count against bank qualified.
Right, yeah.
So there may be some of these refinancings and even temporary notes that have been renewed that might not count against it, so.
Right,
So
Okay.
don't make the assumption that we're gonna be over 10 million necessarily until after we've had a chance to talk with.
So
to talk to Gilmore and Bell
Yeah,
and.
let's just
narrow it
assume
down.
that we want to do this, we want to have money for the 670, cause we still owe 80% of that, temporary note. And we would like to be able to work with MRC if we can. So, the next step then would be to find out from Gilmore Bell.
Does that put us over the 10 million?
Right.
Yeah.
Okay.
And my only other question would be if we had another project that came up, where does that put us? For example, you had another subdivision that decided they wanted to do a project here next year, or this year, I guess.
Yeah.
No, next year, going into next year, and we had to do temporary notes, where would that put us with that as well?
Yeah.
What kind of leeway does that give us to do another project?
Yeah, and I think it's, as I understand it, let's say we're able to do, you know, this issue right now, including MRC, and stay under $10 million and be fine. And then after that, another project pops up that you weren't expecting. As I understand it, you could still borrow for that other project, but that borrowing would have to be non-bank qualified, which means it would have a little higher interest rate on it, but it wouldn't prohibit you from doing it. It's not like you couldn't issue the debt if you wanted to. And as far as the interest rate differential, we're not talking about 1 or 2 percentage points. We're probably talking about something between 1/10 and 2/10 of a percentage point higher interest rate. Yeah.
Okay.
Great. I know I kind of covered a lot of ground here, and I know that there's a lot of numbers here, and there's a lot of kind of details and minutia that you can get into in these discussions, so.
You're just as good as Roger, only you're faster.
Well, I learned from Roger, and
Yeah,
so
I
I
know.
appreciate that comment.
Yeah, you're good.
Yeah.
Okay.
Anything else? We did
What,
talk
what
about?
would be the cutoff point? I mean, if we have these discussions, at what point, if we would do in August, would you have to start to,
To get the, sort of the ball
Process.
rolling.
yeah,
I always like to say, from the time that if we wanna close the bond issue, let's say August 1, we would need to, I always like to say 90 days. Is if you say go March 1, that would be a nice comfortable pace then to get the bond issue done and completed by August.
That's what we've
And there's
historically
a portion of
used
special
in it,
assessment
as
on
we've
it, too.
always
Is that okay?
said
Yeah,
we
then
need a
We
decision,
don't wanna shorten it
by
any
March 1.
from that, yeah,
and then we start all the detail from there.
okay,
yeah.
And, set out a timeline where certain things have to be done by certain dates to hit August 1.
Yeah,
perfect.
yeah, and with the special assessments, that 90 days, you can't really compress that time schedule, and you gotta be ready to move.
August is busy.
Yeah,
Special assessments done.
yeah, and so that does kind of bring up the question is what would work best for when the project is done and what your workload looks like, because we could always do it a little earlier than August, or we could do it a little later than August, whatever sort of fits your schedule too.
Perfect.
But having the temporary notes, I think what we need to do is, we'll put together a little schedule, but you're gonna need to take action to renew those notes before they come due on February 1.
Right.
So you'll probably need to take some action this month to authorize proceeding with renewing the notes, and then probably in January, then you'll need to take the step to officially renew those notes.
One other thing I'd say is that B 2019 outstanding temporary note, that is the community building that we don't intend to bond. We'll pay that temporary note off as we get sales tax proceeds, so that's what that is, in case you had any questions on that.
Okay. Sounds good.
Thanks.
And then we have one more drive left today,
Actually up to Salina.
Salina,
Yeah,
and then we'll,
and then home.
okay.
Just to make sure we're on the same page, on the bank qualified question, do you want us to reach out to Gilmore and Bell, or you?
I'll go, do you want me to go ahead and, I'll reach out to him?
I've
and-
reached out to him, I just haven't got a response, so
Okay.
maybe if you
Yeah.
would too.
Yeah, let's,
Need to do it, Roger reached out to him most of the time, so why don't you reach out and see
yeah,
what you
I'll do
get?
that, and maybe I'll copy you, and maybe you and I and Garth could just have a call,
That'd be great,
just to kind of sort through, and you can kind of hear the issues that come up in this one.
absolutely. We like conference calls.
Okay.
You got any questions, Gary, since this is kind of new to
I'm
you?
really glad you had me set in on this, cause this is incredibly interesting to me.
Yeah.
So thank you very much for that
Sure.
presentation.
You ever have questions on more of the ins and outs of it? I'm sure there's more information we can get you on.
Oh,
And
yeah.
there may be some terms that you maybe not heard here, and, we'd be more than willing to get you any information,
Yeah,
just to kind of be helpful for you.
Yeah.
as we go.
absolutely.